Water sources in the desert lands. Most Bible events happen in a region near the east end of the Mediterranean Sea. There, on the edge of the desert, water was scarce and needed to be stored. There were three main sources of water in this desert area: wells, cisterns, and springs. All three are mentioned in Proverbs 5:15 through 16. A well is a man-made hole in the ground dug down to the underground water level. Wells were often walled with stone. It is difficult to dig a well in these lands because the soil is often rocky, so a well was the property of the people who dug it. People used a container attached to a rope to draw water from a well. Wells were often very deep and dangerous, so they were usually covered to keep animals from falling in and spoiling the water. A cistern is a large hole in the ground used to collect and store rainwater. A cistern could be natural or a man-made pit. Often, the soil in Bible lands does not absorb water quickly. When rain falls, it begins to run off rather than soaking into the soil. Cisterns were used to collect rainwater and store it for use during the dry months of the year. Sometimes, the water from a cistern was drawn the same way as from a well. But usually cisterns had steps down to the water. Steps made it easier to get the water. They also made it easier to clean the cistern. Cisterns had to be cleaned periodically to prevent buildup of sediment. The prophet Jeremiah was imprisoned in a muddy cistern. A spring is a stream of water flowing naturally from the earth. Springs are the best and freshest water sources. Springs form where water underground meets a rock layer that it cannot penetrate. Since the water cannot descend further, it begins to flow sideways until it finds an exit. Plants will grow around a spring, even in the desert. Property with one or more springs was highly valued. Some springs are seasonal. They are dry for many months each year. Other springs flow all year depending on the amount of water that gathers on the rock layer. Rainfall was scarce in many places, so people often settled near a source of water. Often, towns were built on high places so that they were easier to defend. The spring normally would be located at the bottom of the hill. If the town was surrounded by a wall, it was sometimes not practical to extend the wall to include the spring, so people devised a way to access the water from inside the town walls. A hole was dug inside of the town walls. Then a tunnel was dug to the spring from the hole. Joab and his men were able to use such a tunnel to capture the city of Jerusalem. Outside the town walls, the spring was hidden with rocks and earth so enemies would not discover it. An oasis is an isolated area of vegetation in a desert surrounding a spring or underground water source. Large oases provide homes for animals and people. The Israelites camped at the large oasis of Kadesh Barnea. Water was a limited and valuable resource. So in the Bible, springs of water are sometimes a symbol of life. In the Old Testament, the prophets speak of God's restoration of fortunes of the people as springs coming out as streams in the desert.